Earlier this week, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer hinted at further alignment between the UK and the EU single market, saying it would be preferable to a UK-EU customs union. According to The Observer, Downing Street is now exploring the possibility of a Swiss-style dynamic realignment deal with the EU, which would involve sector-by-sector agreements in the single market, rather than pursuing a bespoke customs union as supported by the Liberal Democrats and some senior Labour MPs. So, in this video, we'll explain why Labour wants a Swiss-style trading relationship with the EU, and how they're going about it. If you want more UK political drama from us, then check out our podcast Starmageddon, where we track the successes and failures of this new Labour government. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. Let's start by explaining both the EU single market and customs union. The EU's customs union includes all 27 EU member states, plus Monaco, Andorra, San Marino, the British military bases of Akrotiri and Dhekelia in Cyprus, and Turkey, and consists of two agreements. The first is to remove all tariffs on goods traded between members, and the second is to apply a common external tariff to goods imported from outside the union, so that all countries apply the same tariffs to external imports. This facilitates trade by removing the need to prove the origin of goods traded within the customs union, but also means that countries are unable to set their own tariff rates, reducing their scope to run an independent trade policy. The EU single market, meanwhile, is a common set of laws regulating the movement of goods, services, people, and capital inside the bloc. It covers all 27 EU member states, plus Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland, and is intended to stimulate trade, fuel growth and competition, and give businesses greater access to the European market. The EU single market has a GDP of €17.1 trillion, representing 15% of global trade, covers 450 million consumers, and, according to World Bank data, is the second largest consumer market in the world after the US. Anyway, after Brexit took effect at the end of 2020, the UK left both the EU single market and customs union. Since then, UK-EU trade has been determined by the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, or TCA, a free trade agreement that offers the UK tariff-free trade with the EU. However, greater trade friction as a result of Brexit has harmed small businesses, particularly those producing miscellaneous manufactures like medical equipment, jewellery, sports goods, toys and office supplies, which saw up to a 30% drop in exports to the EU in the 3 years after Brexit. In fact, analysis published in January 2024 by the Centre for European Reform, modelling the UK's hypothetical trade if it had stayed in the EU, suggests that UK goods exports to both the EU and rest of the world were around 13% lower than if the UK had remained a member of the EU. Despite the clear impact on trade, Brexit remained a politically sensitive issue. So, in their 2024 manifesto, Labour ruled out rejoining either the EU's customs union or single market, pledging instead to reset relations with the bloc. Since Labour took office, the UK has signed agreements with the EU on fishing, food standards, youth mobility, carbon pricing and electricity trading, while Starmer has repeated his manifesto pledge that the UK will not rejoin the EU's single market or customs union. In recent months, however, there have been growing calls for closer UK-EU trade relations, driven largely by economic concerns. In early December, the Liberal Democrats narrowly passed a bill requiring the government to start negotiations on a customs union deal with the EU, which, while unlikely to become law without government support, was intended to push Labour towards the idea of a UK-EU customs union. Indeed, last month, several senior Labour figures, including cabinet members David Lammy and Wes Streeting, expressed support for a UK-EU customs union. But this week, Starmer appeared to turn away from the idea, suggesting the UK should align with the EU's single market instead. According to The Observer, Starmer's team are now exploring a Swiss-style dynamic realignment deal, which would give the UK access to the EU's single market whilst retaining some independence on trade policy. For context, Switzerland isn't a member of the EU, but has partial access to the EU single market, and its EU trade policy consists of over 120 bilateral agreements in areas like free movement, transport, security, research and education, with Switzerland adopting certain EU laws and standards in order to align it with the bloc. So, why is Labour reportedly looking into a Swiss-style trade deal with the EU? Well, the main reason is to stimulate economic growth. As we've covered in previous videos, the UK economy is pretty sluggish, with November estimates projecting GDP growth of around 1.4% in 2026. Considering Labour's top priority is growing the economy, and they've made seemingly little progress on this, they now appear to be turning their attention towards improving trade with the EU. The government argues that a UK-EU customs union might force it to give up the trade deals it's already signed with the US and India, by subjecting the UK to the same tariffs as the EU, whereas greater single market alignment would allow the UK to maintain more freedom over its trade policy. Labour is now planning to introduce a bill to give ministers powers to align with the EU in more areas, although this could provoke backlash from opposition MPs if it's deemed to go too far. The second reason Labour want a Swiss-style trading relationship with the EU is that it would be less politically risky than formally taking the UK back into either the customs union or single market. YouGov polling from June shows there's very little difference in public sentiment towards rejoining the customs union versus the single market, with both options supported by just under half of respondents. But there is notably higher support for a quote closer relationship with the EU without rejoining. A separate YouGov survey actually suggests that if a new referendum were held on whether the UK should rejoin or stay out of the EU, rejoin would win by a clear margin of 8 million votes. However, there are sensible reasons why Labour wouldn't want to reopen the Brexit debate with another vote. Firstly, the potentially toxic nature of another debate on the EU and national sovereignty, and secondly, the fact that one of the key architects of Brexit, former UKIP leader Nigel Farage, is now leading the opinion polls with Reform UK. Ultimately, a deeper trade relationship with the EU, marked by a series of sector-by-sector agreements, could help support small businesses in the UK, although any new deals would likely warrant significant scrutiny in Parliament. For the UK government specifically, the high levels of public support for closer relations with the EU and Labour's desperate need for good news suggest they should make this a priority in 2026. If you're interested in this, we have a whole UK section in the latest issue of Our magazine. There we document the rise of a new left, why this year's elections are critical at all levels, as well as the strategy Starmer ought to take to maintain power, and Farage to gain power. There's so much more in this issue too. In addition to our cover story about the new Middle East, there's also full sections dedicated to UK, EU and global news. The EU section includes our interview with fellow creator Money and Macro, where we discuss how to fix the European economy, Macron's fall from grace, and how Albania has implemented an AI minister. The global section discusses why Trump's mandate isn't quite what it seems, how politicians conquered social media, as well as our rundown of the biggest elections that happened in 2025. Subscribers to Too Long automatically get 20% off every copy as long as they stay subscribed. But as a special New Year offer, you can get an additional 30% off your first issue if you use the code at checkout.